What happens when the world's most private K-pop superstar gets accidentally match-made with the loudest woman at a luxury couple's retreat? Because Joo-Won came to his friend's vineyard only for business. No distractions, no scandals, no falling in love. And Mee Mee wasn't looking for romance either. She was just there babysitting another idol's son while wealthy couples enjoyed their perfect little getaways. But one unexpected picnic turns into lingering eye contact. Then a late-night conversation reveals impossible chemistry. And suddenly, the quiet man in public can't stop watching the funny, outspoken woman who treats him like a normal person instead of a global obsession. Now the tension is getting harder to hide. He's invited her to his New Year's concert. Fans are becoming suspicious. His team is nervous. And Mee Mee is realizing that behind Joo-Won's calm exterior is a man who loves deeply and protectively. Welcome back to Christmas in Old Towne Love Stories, where the luxury is decadent, the chemistry is addictive, and love never shows up when it's convenient. If you love quiet, obsessed men, soft life luxury, romance, emotional tension, possessive energy, and love stories like, comment, subscribe. Now get comfortable because Joo-Won was never supposed to fall for her. Let's get into the story. Nobody expected the quiet K-pop superstar to stop his concert at midnight, point into the crowd, and kiss one loud girl from Atlanta in front of thousands of screaming fans. But then again, nobody expected Joo-Won to fall in love with Mee Mee. One day earlier is where it all began. The royal jet glided through soft morning clouds, the world below glowing in ribbons of gold and pale blue as dawn stretched across the horizon. Princess Mel, who was still getting used to her new title, sat curled beneath a cream fuzzy blanket, her legs draped across Prince Soren's lap while Paris glowed softly on the flight map nearby. She felt a peace that she hadn't felt in days, maybe months. Soren loosened the collar of his black cashmere sweater and kissed the inside of her wrist absent-mindedly while scrolling through honeymoon restaurant recommendations, with entirely too much focus for a man supposedly vacationing. Mel smiled sleepily. You know, we don't actually have to eat at every Michelin restaurant in Paris. Soren looked offended. Yes, we do. She laughed softly before picking up her phone. Only Soren could make romance sound strategic. Tomorrow was New Year's Eve. After everything they'd survived, the royal wedding, the vineyard retreat, the kidnapping, the chaos, they were finally getting the honeymoon they'd originally planned. Just Paris, just the two of them. No bodyguards hovering nearby, no royal obligations, no enemies. Hopefully, Mel tucked herself closer beneath Soren's arm, breathing in the warm scent of sandalwood and expensive cologne lingering against his black cashmere sweater. You know, she teased lightly, normal honeymoon couples probably sleep. We slept, Soren said. Mel looked at him slowly. Soren finally glanced over, entirely unashamed. A little. Goodness, she loved this man. Soren reached over, brushing his thumb along her jaw with quiet affection before returning to his tablet. I scheduled dinner overlooking the Eiffel Tower tonight, he said casually. And tomorrow I arranged a private river cruise after brunch, then shopping. Mel blinked at him. You arranged all that while I was asleep, he nodded. That is both romantic and a little terrifying, Mel said. Soren laughed. Mel smiled against his shoulder before reaching for her phone. Oh, let me check on Mee Mee before she gets herself banned from California. Soren smirked, probably too late for that. His voice still carried that husky tenderness from waking up together only an hour earlier. Mel laughed again. She needed those laughs. Yesterday had officially ended the Callaways. Luxury couples retreat at their vineyard estate in Temecula. What was supposed to be a glamorous post-wedding, pre-honeymoon pit stop with horseback riding, hot air balloons, wine tastings turned into near-death experiences, mafia drama, and emotional revelations. Honestly, talk about doing the most. Also invited to the vineyard were their assistants Edward and Rosie, whose own whirlwind romance had become impossible to ignore. And also Maeve and Tae Kim, along with their adorable toddler Yoon, Detective Medina Oh, and her dangerously devoted ex-crime boss husband Min Jae. And last but not least there was Mee Mee, Mel's loud, hilarious cousin who somehow managed to capture the attention of Tae Kim's former K-pop bandmate Joo-Won. The Joo-Won, former K-pop boy band member, now solo artist, global superstar, human heart attack in designer denim. Originally, he was only at the vineyard to quickly discuss a business deal with Tae and Grant. Instead, he ended up helping rescue Mel after she'd been abducted by enemies connected to Min-jae's old underworld life who had partnered with Lady Vivienne, a woman of Avalerian nobility, enraged that Soren hadn't married her. But somewhere between the vineyard chaos and surviving armed criminals, Mee Mee and Joo-Won started developing real feelings. Hey loves, if you haven't listened to the vineyard couple's retreat story yet, definitely listen to episode 6, part 3 linked in the description, but let's start this one. Mel smiled to herself and tapped FaceTime. Mee Mee's face exploded onto the screen. She had a scarf wrapped around her face and oversized sunnies. She was dramatic, dawling hello royal people. Mel winced. Why are you yelling? Because we're driving with the windows down and I want to make sure you can hear me. Look who I'm with. Camera swung. Rosie sits neatly in the backseat beside Edward, their knees touching. Neither moves. Edward immediately straightened. Good morning, Your Highness. Rosie grins, he practiced that. I did not. Camera shifted forward. Joo-Won sat quietly in black designer sunglasses and rose gold Rolex paired again with a simple white t-shirt and denim while driving the SUV himself. Mel was shocked. He's driving. Mee Mee gasped dramatically. Girl, he don't even let the label drive him. Apparently he has trust issues and excellent credit. Joo-Won huffed. Mee Mee leaned forward. Tell her where we're going. Joo-Won calmly. L.A. Mee Mee gasped. That's it, that's all you gotta say. She shook her head. Mel, we're going to his New Year's Eve concert. He's performing tomorrow. Mel's eyes widened. Oh wow, that's nice. Just then a song came on through the speakers. Smooth, atmospheric, seductive. Mee Mee immediately grabbed the volume knob. Ooh, wait, I love this song. Joo-Won glanced at her briefly. That's mine. Mee Mee froze. Boy, shut up. Rosie burst out laughing. Edward covered his smile with his hand. Mee Mee stared at the stereo in disbelief. This is you. Joo-Won nodded once, her jaw dropped. Well, turn it up then. Even Joo-Won laughed quietly at that. Mel smiled warmly through the screen. Behave yourselves. Mee Mee threw her head back dramatically. Girl, you behave yourself. You're literally on a private jet to Paris with a prince. Soren lazily leaned into frame. I've officially authorized her misbehavior starting. He slowly glanced toward Mel. Right now. Mel nearly choked. Mee Mee screamed. The screen immediately disconnected. Mee Mee stared at the phone. Well, dang, excuse me, that man is in love. Rosie burst into laughter. He said they had things to do. Edward laughed loudly from the backseat. That's my boss. Across the SUV, Joo-Won lifted a single eyebrow, quietly amused as he glanced toward Mee Mee. She caught the look instantly. What? She demanded. Joo-Won shrugged casually. Nothing. But the faint smile lingering on his face said otherwise. Just then, Mee Mee's phone buzzed again. A text from Jenny, her business partner. Mee Mee boo, post more of those luxury spots ASAP. Engagement is going crazy right now. Mee Mee sighed softly and slid the phone back into her purse. Joo-Won noticed immediately. Everything okay? Yeah, she shrugged. Just hustle life, my online store never sleeps. Rosie perked up. Wait, y'all's engagement is up. Mee Mee nodded. Apparently, folks like seeing rich people life through my POV. That earned another quiet smile from Joo-Won. Mee Mee continued. I'm the face of the brand and everything. She popped her lips playfully. But sometimes even I want to be offline. She glanced out the window. I'll post more when we get to the hotel. Joo-Won looked at her for a brief moment, thoughtful and unreadable, before returning his attention to the road ahead. California highways stretched gold beneath the morning sun. Mee Mee talked nonstop from the passenger seat while Rosie tried very hard not to stare at Edward, and Edward tried even harder not to stare at Rosie. What's next on the playlist, DJ? Mee Mee asked, turning toward Joo-Won. One glance in the rearview mirror toward Edward and Rosie, he smiled. I'm taking it back, and suddenly Amaran's touch filled the SUV. Rosie immediately covered her face. Edward laughed under his breath. Yup, Rosie muttered. He's definitely making fun of us. Mee Mee howled. Boy, you are cray. Before she could finish, Joo-Won calmly slid one hand from the steering wheel onto her thigh. Warm, steady, possessive enough to make her entire sentence disappear. Oh yeah, he asked quietly. Then he gave her leg a slow little squeeze and left his hand there. Mee Mee blinked. Once, twice. The SUV suddenly felt extremely warm. For the first time all morning, she had absolutely nothing to say. Edward looked out the window immediately, pretending not to notice. Rosie nearly choked, trying not to laugh. Meanwhile, Joo-Won said nothing else. Didn't smirk, didn't tease her. Just kept driving with one hand on the wheel while the other rested casually on her thigh like it belonged there. Then, after a moment, he adjusted the AC vent slightly toward her without looking away from the road. Mee Mee stared at him, because somehow, That tiny gesture felt even more intimate than the hand on her leg. The drive was about an hour and a half. Traffic actually moved. But everything ticked up a notch when the SUV pulled into a luxury Beverly Hills hotel. A wall of sound, a high-pitched, rhythmic roar slammed against the reinforced glass. Instant chaos, screaming fans. "Joo-Won!" someone shouted. "He's here," said another. Mee Mee froze. Hundreds of fans, like a platoon of zombies, had transformed the sidewalk into a sea of homemade light sticks and fluttering banners. As the door began to heavy slide open, the barricades groaned under the sudden, desperate weight of the crowd. Flashbulbs strobed in a blinding, frenetic rhythm, turning the afternoon sun into a jagged kaleidoscope. "Joo-Won! Laud, he's fine. Joo-Won!" The name was a chant and a riot all at once. Joo-Won threw on his hoodie that was in the backseat, pulled it over his head. Security guards, shoulders braced and faces grim, fought to hold back the tide as Joo-Won stepped out. Ji-sun, a small but mighty force of a woman who managed both Joo-Won and Tae-Kim, was right there waiting. "Let's go, Jae," she ordered before eyeing Mee Mee, Edward, and Rosie, still sitting in the vehicle. Ji-sun whispered something in one of the security guards' ears and then began to guide Joo-Won to the hotel entrance. The other two managers instantly surrounded him, flanking him on all sides. Stylists fixed his clothes mid-walk. A publicist was already talking into a headset. Mee Mee watched through the tinted window, her breath hitching as she froze in the sudden vacuum of the chaos. "This is a lot," she whispered, the sheer magnetism of the moment pinning her to her seat. After Joo-Won's security had grabbed their bags and escorted them up the elevator, when they were finally inside the hotel suite door, Rosie paused as she read the room assignment message on her phone. "Oh, wow." Mee Mee looked up immediately. "What?" Rosie smiled slowly, pointing between them. "They put you and I together." Edward glanced down at his own phone. "And me, separately." Mee Mee tilted her head, fingers still in her braids. "Wait, where's Joo-Won staying? Who even got the rooms?" Edward hesitated just a beat too long. "Joo-Won's team arranged it." Rosie nodded like she'd already figured it out. "Probably Ji-sun. She doesn't play, wants her talent focused." Edward added carefully, "And I assume the rooms are like this so we don't interfere with his schedule." Rosie added to it, "Yeah, Ji-sun doesn't like distractions. You should have seen how she was when Maeve and Tae were first seeing each other. She was like a parent for real." A pause, then it clicked. Mee Mee blinked. "Oh," she leaned back against the counter, processing it, then shrugged like she refused to let it land too deep. "Got it, celeb life. Well," she said brightly, clapping her hands once, "no complaints from me. I mean, this suite is fire, just look around. And it's way too early for y'all to be sharing a room anyway." Edward went instantly red. Rosie turned her face away, laughing under her breath. Mee Mee, already recovering, spun toward the mirror. "Come on, let's get some selfies. If there's no picture, it didn't happen." Rosie followed her energy easily. Edward lingered half a second longer, watching them both like it would be a long but interesting day. That night, they waited for Joo-Won before heading out to dinner. Mee Mee kept checking her phone, pretending she wasn't checking it. 8:10. 8:17. Finally, Joo-Won texted, "Sorry, in the studio, something came up, I'll see you later tonight." Mee Mee stared at the screen a moment too long. The excitement didn't disappear, but it shifted. Rosie noticed first. "He busy." Edward tried gently. "He's probably rehearsing for tomorrow." Mee Mee exhaled, forcing a grin back into place. "Yeah, star life." She grabbed her bag. "Let's go to the Grove." Rosie blinked. "Right now." Mee Mee already walking. "I'm hungry, and if I sit in this room any longer, I'm gonna go crazy." Edward muttered as he followed. "You mean crazier." "Mee Mee, I heard that, Eddie." They ended up eating an absurd assortment of international foods from the original farmer's market beside the Grove before grabbing warm pink boxes from Bob's Donuts for dessert. Mee Mee ordered extra. "For Joo-Won," she said casually. Edward raised an eyebrow as he bit into his donut. "Do you think he's even allowed to eat these?" Mee Mee shrugged her shoulders. By the time they returned to the hotel, it was after 10. Still no text. Mee Mee tried not to care, but she did. So she decided it was shower time, maybe even bedtime. Tomorrow would be a long day, and whatever this thing was between her and Joo-Won had her emotions moving like a roller coaster she had absolutely not signed consent forms for. Rosie and Edward were still downstairs somewhere taking one of their awkward romantic little walks. Mee Mee stepped out of the shower wrapped in steam and the luxury body oil the hotel provided when she saw her phone lighting up across the bathroom counter. 3 missed calls. Joo-Won. "Oh, dang." She grabbed the phone immediately. The last message read, Ji-sun put me on a curfew, wants me rested before tomorrow's show. But do you feel up to meeting for a few minutes in about 15? Mee Mee smiled so hard it irritated her spirit. She typed back quickly, Hey K-pop, I just got out the shower. But sure. 3 dots appeared instantly. Then, Penthouse Suite Room 800, private elevator. Mee Mee blinked. Penthouse, private elevator. Suddenly she was moving fast. More moisturizer, perfume, lip gloss. The kind that tasted like strawberries. She settled on a soft tank dress and flat sandals, pretty enough to look effortless while actually requiring effort. What she had not realized was that Joo-Won had been staying 1 floor above them the entire time. His staff had occupied the lower suites near her while he'd been tucked away upstairs like some hidden treasure. Mee Mee knocked once, then immediately regretted existing. Because when the door opened, good gracious, Joo-Won's bleached blonde hair was dripping wet, sticking up messily as he dried it with a towel. He wore one of the hotel's white plush robes untied over black lounge pants, barefoot against the hardwood floors. And the robe was doing absolutely nothing useful. Mee Mee forgot language. The man was built far more solidly than she'd expected beneath all those white tees and quiet stares. Suddenly, her understanding of how he'd helped the bodyguards fight the bodyguards a few days ago to save Mel, how he'd thrown Donnie, a grown man, through a wine cellar door became much clearer. And if you haven't heard the honeymoon episode yet, it's the one before this one. It's linked in the description, but we digress. Joo-Won blinked when he saw her. Realizing he was dripping wet and in an open robe, he looked mildly alarmed himself. Oh, he said quickly. Sorry, I thought I had more time before you got here. Mee Mee's eyes betrayed her one final time before she shoved the donut box directly into his chest. Here, dessert. He looked down at the pink box, then back at her. He smiled. Thanks. Mee Mee crossed her arms defensively. You don't have to eat them if you're watching your girlish figure. A diet? Joo-Won laughed softly. Then, without breaking eye contact, he opened the box, grabbed one of the cream-filled donuts, and took a slow bite. Mee Mee watched his mouth close around the pastry and instantly regretted zooming in. I'll burn it off tomorrow, he said calmly. That smile, that voice, that robe, she was feeling lightheaded. The silence shifted. Joo-Won looked at her, really looked at her. Mee Mee suddenly forgot every slick sentence she'd prepared in the elevator. What? She asked suspiciously. His eyes flicked briefly to her lips. Nothing. But she knew it wasn't nothing. What was he actually thinking? Mee Mee stepped closer before common sense could tackle her to the ground. Her hands slid around his neck, and Joo-Won kissed her instantly, like he'd been holding himself back for hours. His hand moved gently into her braids, the other settling at her waist as he pulled her closer. Mee Mee melted against him with a tiny sound she couldn't fight escaping. The kiss deepened, slow at first, then devastating. She touched his chest. His abs, because honestly, God had spent extra time there and she felt obligated to acknowledge the craftsmanship. Joo-Won exhaled softly against her mouth, pulling her impossibly closer. Then suddenly, he stopped. Not fully. His face hovered dangerously close to her as both of them tried to remember how breathing worked. If you stay longer, he warned quietly, voice rough now, I'm not going to behave. Mee Mee felt that sentence in her kneecaps. Joo-Won closed his eyes briefly like restraint physically hurt him. Then he opened them again. So, he murmured softly, go get some sleep, Mee Mee. She actually whimpered a little. Humiliating. He smiled, small, dangerous, affectionate, and tied his robe properly before walking her to the door. Then he opened it, and standing there was Ji-sun. Alongside another manager, both staring. Ji-sun took one look at Mee Mee's swollen lips and closed her eyes briefly toward heaven, like a woman carrying the burden of international brand partnerships on her back. Mee Mee slunk past her in complete silence, which, honestly, was how everyone knew it was serious. The next day, Mee Mee had taken forever to decide on what she was wearing and finally opted on an itty-bitty corset dress. She looked in the mirror and said, understated. Rosie laughed as she brushed her hair. The only thing understated about that is the color. Whose heart are we breaking in that? Mee Mee smiled. I know, right. Then she sang, let's give them something to talk about as she finished applying her makeup. Edward knocked on the door. Rosie put the brush down. That's our cue. The driver must be here. Let's go see your man. Mee Mee swung her braids around. He's not my man. I haven't even heard from Joo-Won all day. Rosie gave her a look like, sure, as she grabbed her coat. When they arrived at the concert, a security guard checked their credentials before escorting them past screaming fans and down toward the artist guest section near the stage. Mee Mee suddenly realized they weren't sitting in regular seats because this area was filled with celebrities, stylists, executives, and influencers. They were just getting settled when Edward's phone buzzed right before the performance was beginning. A message from Ji-sun, but it didn't fully load, just fragments. He read the text to himself. Edward, backstage. Backstage, what? What was the rest of the message? He frowned. Rosie leaned in. What is it? Edward exhaled, already shifting in his seat. Ji-sun is texting me, but it's not going through. I think she's downstairs, backstage level. I'll be right back. I need to check something. Rosie straightened immediately. I'm coming. It's probably just, Rosie interrupted. I'm coming. Maybe she needs help. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Okay, stay close. It's packed in here. Then Rosie turned to Mee Mee. Be right back. Mee Mee nodded. They tried to leave through the main corridor, but security was bottlenecked, VIP movement slowed by crowd surge and production changes. Rosie groaned softly, glancing at the packed hallway. I'm not walking through that crowd again, Edward pointed. Look, there's a service elevator near the side access. Rosie frowned. That's for staff. Edward sighed. True, but it's the closest elevator. Fine, she said. Shortcut it is. They slipped through a quieter side corridor, dim lights, stage hum echoing through the walls, distant bass vibrating the floor beneath them. Edward tapped the elevator button. It dinged. Nothing. Rosie leaned back against the wall. Of course it's slow. Edward checked his phone again, still nothing from Ji-sun, still partial messages. The elevator finally arrived with a soft mechanical chime. Doors opened. Empty. They stepped in. She pressed the button for backstage level. The deeper Mee Mee walked into the arena, the more surreal everything felt. Staff wearing headsets rushed past her. Dancers stretched backstage beneath fluorescent lights. Security guards stood like statues near restricted entrances. And everywhere she turned, giant screens flashed Joo-Won's face. She eventually found her way back to the artist guest section, where a group of beautiful women nearby whispered excitedly over cocktails and catered desserts. Most of them she recognized from YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram. I heard he's seeing a model, one said casually before sipping her drink. No, an actress, another corrected while reaching for macarons. A third glanced into her phone camera to fix her lipstick. If I was with Joo-Won, he'd never be outside. He is too fine. A fourth jumped in. Joo-Won has never had a serious girlfriend. Idols never do. The first woman laughed while stuffing complimentary swag into her designer bag. Please, they're not even allowed to have relationships. Trust me, I tried. With Joo-Won, someone asked. The entire boy band. The group burst into laughter. But hey, she shrugged, at least I got VIP tickets out of it. Mee Mee slowed her steps. And for the first time that night, her confidence cracked a little, because suddenly this all felt much bigger than flirtation in a wine cellar, bigger than stolen kisses in a penthouse suite. This was global, and she was just Mee Mee. Sure, she was that girl, a baddie among baddies, but what did she really know about Joo-Won, about this world? She'd never been kissed like that before, never felt seen that quickly by anyone. He was beautiful, quiet, mysterious. And somehow, beneath all the fame, he seemed to notice the parts of her most people overlooked. Beneath the jokes, beneath the sass, beneath the performance. But Mee Mee refused to become another woman lost in a celebrity fantasy. What was she even doing here? And where were Rosie and Edward? Maybe she should leave too. Yes, that was exactly what she should do. So she turned away from the artist guest section and started walking toward the arena exit. Backstage, Joo-Won sat alone beneath dim lighting while stylists and production staff moved around him in controlled chaos. But he remained still, quiet, focused. One manager adjusted his in-ear monitor while another checked the set list. Then Ji-sun approached, 10 minutes. Joo-Won nodded once, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. A memory flashed through him, Mee Mee laughing against his mouth in the wine cellar. Loud, unfiltered, warm, real. A version of himself existed around her that no audience had ever seen. No cameras. No choreography. No performance. Just him. Joo-Won exhaled slowly, eyes lowering toward the floor before standing. Ji-sun popped back out. Joo, it's time. He stretched his neck to the left and then to the right and walked towards the stage. Back at the service elevator, the doors began to close. Halfway shut, the lights flickered. The elevator jerked, stopped. A beat of silence, Rosie blinked. No, Edward stared at the panel. No. The elevator gave a soft, final thunk, dead still. They banged, pushed the emergency button, but no go. The elevator was stuck, and so were they. Rosie looked at her watch. Oh no, it's already 10:30, so the show has started. They could hear the roar of the crowd below, a loud rumble, but they weren't moving. Before Mee Mee could call an Uber, Mel suddenly popped up on FaceTime. She was standing on the balcony of her Paris hotel suite wrapped in a silk robe, the Eiffel Tower glowing behind her. Hey, cuz, Mel smiled. Hey, boo, Mee Mee answered, though without her usual spark. Mel narrowed her eyes immediately. What's wrong? Mee Mee sighed dramatically. Girl, why are you even awake? It's like 3 in the morning over there. Shouldn't you be somewhere tangled up with that hot prince of yours? Mel burst out laughing. I would be if I could, but Soren is knocked out. The jet lag finally took him down, and this time difference is beating me up too. We celebrated New Year's hours ago. Oh, right. Mee Mee looked away. Mel studied her for a moment. Okay, seriously, what happened? You don't sound like yourself. Mee Mee hesitated. I don't know, I think maybe I got caught up in the moment. I'm feeling like maybe I made too much of nothing. Maybe. Mee Mee, Mel interrupted, voice soft. 2 Corinthians 10:5. Take every thought captive and make it obey Christ. Girl, you cannot let one insecure thought grow into a whole fake reality in your head. Mee Mee stayed quiet. You're one of the most vivacious, intelligent, beautiful, and caring women I know, Mel continued. And the way you were with little Yoon at the vineyard. Please, anybody with sense could see your heart. Then a sleepy voice drifted from somewhere inside the suite. Besides, Soren mumbled from the background, half awake, that guy is absolutely crazy about you. I saw the way he was looking at you, Mee Mee. Mel laughed. Mel, baby, come back to bed, Soren called again. Mel grinned at Mee Mee. See, the prince has spoken. Mee Mee finally laughed. Y'all are ridiculous. No, Mel smiled softly. You just needed somebody to remind you who you are. Now get back in there and watch your man sing. Mee Mee shook her head, smiling now. Love you. Love you more. And then the call ended. Mee Mee returned to the artist guest section. Still no Rosie and Edward. She kept checking her phone. Where are those love birds at? She wondered with worry. The arena pulsed with anticipation as thousands of light sticks shimmered like galaxies beneath the stage lights. The dancers stormed the stage first, bodies ticking sharply to the beat as lights flashed across the arena. They moved through popping and locking into hard-hitting hip-hop choreography, every angle precise, every movement perfectly synchronized. Then Joo-Won stepped out in the center of them, and the audience absolutely lost their minds. The roar was deafening. Mee Mee had been half distracted, checking her phone again for Rosie and Edward, but the second she looked up, she froze. Because this was not the quiet man who drove her from Temecula. Not the man who kissed her breathless in a hotel penthouse wearing a robe and wet hair. This was something else entirely. Joo-Won, dressed in a black sequined blazer, moved with effortless precision, hitting every beat alongside the dancers like the music lived inside his body. The giant screens flashed across his face as he smiled at the crowd with a dangerous kind of confidence she had never seen from him before. Then he grabbed the mic and shouted, "What's up, LA?" The arena shook. Thousands of fans screamed back instantly, and then he started singing. The opening songs were explosive, sharp choreography, pyro, flashing lights. Fans screaming lyrics word for word. Mee Mee blinked slowly, her entire brain short-circuited. He's so turnt, she whispered to herself in disbelief. What in the entire world? All around her, fans were screaming his name at the top of their lungs, waving signs, crying, recording every second on their phones. Joo-Won, Joo-Won, Joo-Won. The chant rolled through the arena like thunder. Mee Mee looked around slowly, overwhelmed by it all. Because somehow she had spent the last 2 days teasing him, flirting with him, kissing him, without fully understanding who he actually was. And yet, watching him now, it wasn't just the fame that shook her. It was him. The confidence. The command. The way the entire arena moved when he moved. Once or twice she thought his eyes might have drifted toward her section, but then the lights shifted and he was gone again. If she'd been drawn to his quiet strength before, this was something beyond that entirely. Back in the cramped elevator, the air had grown warm and heavy, thick with the rhythmic, muffled thumping of the concert bass vibrating through the steel walls. Nearly an hour had ticked by in the metallic silence. Rosie's thumb hovered over her screen, watching the sending bar stall for the 10th time. With a frustrated groan, she let the phone drop into her lap. Edward had long since abandoned his useless phone. He'd slid down the mirrored wall, his long legs folded into a weary squat. "Too many people saturating the Wi-Fi," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to vibrate in the small space. "The signal's being strangled by thousands of fans out there. That's why you can't get through." "I know," Rosie sighed, the sound escaping her in a breathy puff of exhaustion. She mirrored his position, sliding down the opposite wall until her knees bumped against his. Edward toyed with the lanyard of his security credentials for a second before his gaze settled on her, intense and unwavering. He bridged the small gap between them. His hand came up, his palm slightly rough and radiating warmth as he cupped her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek with a tenderness that made her stop breathing for a moment. "I'm sorry, Rosie. I'm sorry I got you trapped in this." Rosie didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the heat of his palm, her heart beginning a frantic rhythm of its own. "This is not your fault, Edward. You didn't break the elevator." She looked at him then, really looked at the sharp, handsome line of his jaw and the vulnerability in his dark eyes. She reached out, her fingers curling around his hand. It was strong and grounding. Edward's eyes darkened as he felt her touch. He didn't let go. Instead, he brought her hand up to his mouth. His lips were soft, his breath hot against her skin as he kissed her knuckles. "I know this isn't ideal," he said, voice dropping an octave. Rosie felt a sudden electric surge of daring. She scooted closer, the friction of her clothes against the floor the only sound in the silence. Her gaze dropped to his lips and then back to his eyes. "I think it is," she whispered. A slow, radiant grin broke across Edward's face. Tension that had been building between them since that first, unexpected kiss at Mel and Soren's wedding reception finally snapped again. But this time, it wasn't abrupt. It was intentional. He reached out, his hands framing her face with a sudden, desperate hunger. It wasn't hard enough to hurt, but there was a fierce certainty in his grip as he pulled her to him. He leaned forward and kissed her with a staggering intensity, a deep, breathless collision as if his very life depended on the connection. Edward and Rosie were so entangled in the kiss, hot and heavy, filled with everything they had wanted to say but didn't know how, that they didn't know that the elevator had started moving. When the door opened on their section's level, a horde of Joo-Won fans were waiting outside of it. They were shocked to see cameras snapping pictures, folks giggling and others finger snapping. They both scrambled to their feet, embarrassed but also laughing, and ran to find Mee Mee. When they joined her, she said, "Where have y'all been?" Rosie said, "Girl, it's a long story." Thousands screaming fans still continuously chanted Joo-Won's name in perfect rhythm as smoke rolled across the stage. Finally, "This is crazy," she whispered. Mee Mee looked emotionally overwhelmed watching the crowd go nuts over Joo-Won. Rosie noticed and quietly asked, "You good?" But halfway through the set, the lights dimmed. The dancers disappeared, and Joo-Won walked back onto the stage alone. He had changed to a familiar outfit. White tee, rockstar rhinestone denim, diamond cross chain glimmering against his chest, rose gold Rolex flashing beneath the lights. Mee Mee sat up immediately. It was now nearing countdown time. Sweat glistened along Joo-Won's neck as the final notes of his set faded into deafening screams. He wiped his brow with a white towel, poured some water over his head and shook it wildly. The crowd got hype. He had performed for an hour and 20 minutes straight. The concert lights dropped low. The last 10 minutes would be dedicated to the New Year's countdown. A roar exploded through the arena as massive screens lit up in crimson and gold. Joo-Won adjusted the microphone slowly, glancing down briefly before speaking. "I wrote something yesterday," the crowd screamed. He smiled shyly and for the first time all night almost nervous. "It's unfinished," he admitted in Korean before repeating it in English. "But I wanted to try it tonight." The beat started, smooth, slow, dangerously addictive. Mee Mee's stomach tightened instantly. Rosie nodded at Edward, then turned to Mee Mee. She grabbed her hand. "Let's go to the floor. Get in the very front," she yelled. Instinctively, Mee Mee followed. Miraculously, it took them no time to get to the very front. The beat was still building, and then Joo-Won started to sing. "I was quiet at first. You looked at me twice." Rosie's eyes widened beside her. Edward slowly turned toward Mee Mee. Because every single person in that section knew. Immediately. The giant screen flashed close on Joo-Won's face as he sang. White tea on my body, cold shine on my wrist. Mee Mee covered her mouth. No, he did not. On stage, Joo-Won smirked slightly. Like he knew exactly what he was doing now. The audience screamed louder as he continued. Rose gold Rolex, catch the room like a flex. Rosie grabbed Mee Mee's arm violently. That is about you. Mee Mee stared at the stage in disbelief. The lyrics, the white tea, the Rolex, their picnic in Temecula, and the road trip. Mee Mee froze in her seat because suddenly these lyrics hit differently. And then Joo-Won looked directly into the crowd, directly at her. Then I pulled you in real close, real still. Mee Mee nearly stopped breathing. The wine cellar kiss. He was singing about the wine cellar kiss. Oh my God, Rosie whispered. Edward looked equally stunned. The crowd thought it was performance chemistry, but Mee Mee knew better. And apparently so did Joo-Won. By the time the chorus hit, fans were screaming the lyrics back already. Phones lit the arena like stars, and Joo-Won never stopped looking at her. Not once. Then suddenly, he pointed directly toward Mee Mee from the stage. The crowd screamed. Mee Mee pointed at herself immediately. Who, me? Joo-Won laughed softly into the microphone, breathless from performing. Then, in front of 20,000 people, he said, Come here, Mee Mee. The entire arena lost their minds hearing her name. Rosie was screaming. Edward looked deeply entertained. Across the stage, Ji-sun looked like she was actively entering cardiac arrest. Her headset was halfway off while the publicist beside Ji-sun covered her mouth in horror. Not this again, she said, thinking of Tae Kim and Maeve. Because seeing folks publicly, absolutely not. What would the label think? Apparently, Joo-Won did not care tonight. Security rushed toward Mee Mee immediately. She looked ready to pass out. Rosie shoved her upward. Go. I rebuke you, Mee Mee whisper screamed. Edward laughed so hard he nearly folded into his seat. Security escorted Mee Mee toward the stage while thousands of fans recorded every second. This is crazy, she muttered breathlessly. This is actually insane. Joo-Won watched her approach with the softest expression anyone had ever seen from him publicly. Not idol Joo-Won, not superstar Joo-Won, just a man completely gone over one loud woman from Atlanta. And somehow, that was even sexier. Mee Mee finally stepped onto the stage, breathless beneath the blinding lights. The screaming was unreal now. Joo-Won moved toward her slowly like the rest of the arena had disappeared. Then he leaned down close enough for only her to hear. Mee Mee, you've hijacked my mind. I cannot stop thinking about you. And those lines destroyed her. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she had nothing to say. Joo-Won smiled instantly when he realized it. Oh, he teased softly into the mic. I finally made her shy. The crowd exploded. Phones shot into the air. Social media immediately went feral. And within minutes, thousands of people were searching for Mee Mee and her online clothing store. Because the internet needed answers. Who was this beautiful woman from Atlanta that had the world's most private K-pop idol completely out of pocket? And where could they buy her dress? Backstage, Ji-sun looked seconds away from collapse. One of the managers patted her on the back, in a conciliatory, it's gonna be all right sort of way. Mee Mee covered her face while Rosie screamed somewhere in the audience like she was witnessing history. And honestly, she was. Because somewhere between Temecula and LA, between the wine cellar kiss and this stage, between his silence and her chaos, Joo-Won had fallen hard. Then Joo-Won started dancing on Mee Mee, and her body betrayed any of her nervousness because she danced back. Of course she danced. She was Mee Mee, and the audience was uncontrollable. Edward looked at Rosie for a long second before reaching for her hand gently. She grabbed his and smiled. The countdown toward midnight finally began. 10. 9. Joo-Won stood center stage, beneath exploding lights and roaring fans. He looked at only. Mee Mee. 5. 4. Rosie suddenly stopped beneath the flashing lights and deafening screams. Then she grabbed Edward by the jacket and kissed him. She couldn't wait until midnight. No more hesitation, no more awkwardness, just clarity. Edward kissed her back instantly, smiling against her lips. Then suddenly his pocket buzzed. He reluctantly pulled away just enough to check his phone. Ji-sun's text had finally gone through. Edward, backstage, there are donuts for you guys. Edward stared at the screen. Then slowly turned the phone toward Rosie. She blinked once. That's what the text was for. Edward burst out laughing. Rosie shook her head, grabbed his face again, and kissed him even harder as the crowd screamed around them. 3, 2, 1. The arena erupted. Fireworks exploded overhead. Mee Mee laughed breathlessly through overwhelmed tears. You're not that quiet. Joo-Won chucked. You have no idea. Then he kissed her. Not for performance, not for cameras, not for the crowd, for him. For her. In Paris, now cuddled up, super early in the morning. Soren stood again behind Mel at the balcony of their private suite. He kissed the back of her neck gently. You think they're behaving? Mel smiled knowingly. I think they're falling apart beautifully. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from Maeve that read, Girl, your assistants are in LA looking like a whole couple, but that's not the real tea. Look at this pic of your cousin with Joo-Won. And there it was, the biggest entertainment news of the night. Joo-Won passionately kissing Mee Mee on stage. What is it? Asked Soren. Mel lifted her phone so he could see and he laughed uncontrollably. That's how you start a new year, Mel laughed. Soren kissed the back of her neck once more. Well, if this prince and princess thing doesn't work out, maybe we should go into matchmaking. She turned slightly into him, safe in his arms as fireworks painted gold across the Paris skyline. Loved, protected, ready for a new royal start, completely unaware of the danger still waiting for all of them back home. This has been Christmas in Old Towne, where ambitious women, unexpected love, and the holiday spirit collide. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Hit the notification bell and fall in love with our stories. More romances are coming, all happening in the city of Petersburg. The more people subscribe, the more love stories we can tell. Join our Patreon for exclusive behind-the-scenes access as we bring our actual Christmas romantic comedy to life. You'll find all of the information in the description. The more you support, the more love stories we get to tell. And if you're new here, you've got some catching up to do. In Petersburg, the mayor's inner circle is full of brilliant, dynamic women, and each of them finds love at Christmas. Be blessed, and have a very merry everything.